The research is very confusing, and one of the reasons is that there's the perception that all research is created equal, and if it's in a medical journal, it must be correct. But there are so many ways in which you can manipulate research, and one of them is study design. And we see this all the time. So if you have a bad study design, you can set it up exactly to prove your point. Let me give you an example. I am aware of a study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that said eating lower fat diet doesn't really make any difference. Well, if the people eating the high fat diet are eating 39% of calories from fat, and the people eating the low fat diet are eating 36% of calories from fat, you're not going to see any difference between the two. But that's like saying that when people get into a car accident driving 90 miles an hour, almost everybody dies. And the same thing is true when they're going 80 miles an hour. Apparently, it doesn't matter how fast you drive, right? Well, we understand that clearly. It does matter how fast you drive, but you have to have enough of a reduction in speed in order to have a protective effect. And so it is with these types of studies. So a lot of industry-sponsored studies are specifically structured so that whatever this industry represents or whatever this group of manufacturers makes will turn out pretty well. And another thing, too, is that you always have to look at how statistically significant the effect is. Because I read some of these studies everybody's all excited about. And so what you see is that in a particular study funded by the fish industry, it appears that people eating fish have a 0.5% lower risk of having a heart attack during the 1 year that the people were looked at, which really isn't enough time. And self-reported data, this is another important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at studies of diet and how they impact health, is that a lot of it is self-reported data. Like the researchers will ask, what do you eat? Here's the problem. We have very good evidence showing that people lie. And we don't know why this is. We don't know if they're trying to impress the researchers or it's a form of self-delusion, but consistently people will report eating more healthy foods than unhealthy foods. And just to give you an example, the NHANES data, if you're to believe that the self-reported data is true, everybody in the United States is consuming on average fewer calories than it takes to stay alive. Well, you can look around and see that is clearly not the case. So you have to look at these studies and what they show and look at their study design, and because there are lots of different ways you can come up with what looks like a credible research study and get it published that really doesn't have any validity at all. Well, dairy is a special kind of animal food. I don't necessarily think everybody has to be completely vegan to be healthy, which is in itself a controversial stand to take in some circles. However, the people who are eating animal food around the world and surviving, and not just surviving, but thriving, living long lives like the Okinawans, eat a teeny tiny bit of this stuff. That's the big issue. So why do I say exempt dairy when it's okay to eat a little bit of organic chicken or beef or wild-caught fish if you want to? It's a special kind of animal food because it is designed by its very nature to help a baby mammal of varying types to achieve a certain growth rate in a specific period of time. So let's just look at the difference between, say, humans and cows. Cows are born at 90 pounds, and cow's milk is designed to help that animal grow to several hundred pounds within just a few months' time, all right? Humans are born at 6 to 8 pounds, and they take 18 years to reach someplace between 100 and 200 pounds, generally, range, all right? So when you're consuming a product that comes from cows, which has growth promoters designed to grow a ginormous animal in a short period of time, those growth promoters, particularly for adults, can lead to conditions like cancer. But the other thing is that humans and all mammals are weaned eventually. There's usually a pretty specific period of time during which mammals nurse their young, after which they're weaned, and after which they don't consume any mammal's milk from any source. Significant populations on the planet, the Asians, the Latin Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, African Americans, do not digest milk well, cow's milk and milk from other species well. And so they're at a particular disadvantage in terms of increased risk of allergies, asthma, cancer, infections, all kinds of things. So It's just, like I said, in a class of itself. And then, of course, the estrogen content, which we talked about earlier, which is a risk factor for conditions like breast cancer. Well, you know, with Crohn's disease, Crohn's and colitis are part of a family of conditions called inflammatory bowel disease, which are autoimmune diseases. They're in the category of autoimmune diseases. And like other autoimmune diseases, they are brought about by, in part, there's a lot more to autoimmune than just diet, but diet has a really big connection. And what we see in the studies is that the people who are most likely to develop inflammatory bowel disease, like Crohn's, tend to eat a lot of refined and processed foods, a lot of animal food, a lot of fat, a lot of dairy, strong connection with dairy. So if that's what causes it, part of the solution is the opposite. You're going to eat whole foods, you're going to eat more plant food, you're going to eat a lot of less fat and a lot less animal food. Having said that, this particular population of people can't just convert to a plant-based diet like the one that I'm eating today. Their systems have become so fragile that good food can sometimes upset them. So we phase in a plant-based diet through several stages, which involve some low protein, low fat, actually lower fiber plant foods that allow that gastrointestinal tract to start healing up, lower the inflammation for a while, and then eventually get them to the place where they can eat lots of big salads and raw fruit and that sort of thing. But if a Crohn's patient who's having a lot of bloody bowel movements were to eat what I'm going to eat today, it'd be very painful. But once we get the gut all healed up, that person can eat what I'm going to eat today and would be thriving and potentially asymptomatic and not require drug treatment. Well, with hepatitis C, the drug treatments aren't very effective. New drug treatments claim to cure the disease, but we have very limited follow-up. And actually, the period of time in a virus-free state was shortened with these new drugs that were approved. So I'm not a fan, and I'm also not convinced that we've found the cure to hepatitis C. So what we've been able to do with a lot of Hep C patients, put them on an alcohol-free diet. You can't afford to upset the liver anymore. So this is the time you become a teetotaler. You start drinking enough water, eating an optimal diet, and many times what you see is that sometimes the virus goes away. Sometimes it just stays stable. And many conditions, if you can stabilize them and they don't progress, they won't kill you. And for many people who look at the side effects of the drugs, they decide that at least attempting to do this with diet is a good idea. We often use targeted supplements with these people too. Now, one thing that I think occurs to people when we're talking about this is, my gosh, does diet just cure everything? It doesn't cure everything. It cures most things, or at least it contributes to the cure of most things. And people will say, well, can it be this simple? I mean, really, does diet cause all this? I want you to think about this in a little bit different way. You know, the average human puts a ton of food through his body or her body every year. A ton. Now, this room that we're sitting in here, a ton of food wouldn't fit in here. That's how big it is. So it's just impossible for, I think, anybody who's rational to think that you could put a ton of anything through your body and it wouldn't have an effect, good or bad. So we have to look at diet as the foundational thing that is involved in people developing Western diseases, because you don't have a lot of obesity and cancer and heart disease and autoimmune diseases in rural China or Northern Africa. You have a lot of it in the United States, Australia, and Norway, countries that are westernized. So diet is a primary cause, and I don't think anybody gets well from these kinds of chronic conditions without adopting an optimal diet. So I don't want to overpromise the benefit of diet, but I think too many people underestimate the benefit of diet.